Good morning, everyone. We have with us Dr. Burke, Dr. Parker, Supervisor Perez. I understand Council Member Buscaino will not be with us this morning. So we do have a quorum, and we have on schedule today interviews for our representatives in Washington, D.C. And are they there waiting for interviews? Derek, are they with us this morning?
They're here. We're going to go get them, bring in the first firm. The first firm is going to be the Carmen Group. We're doing it by alphabetical order. So we'll bring in the Carmen Group. And Gary Hoytsma and Del Harper will be representing the Carmen Group. We'll be
Gary and Del.
shortly.
Just here.
They're on their way down. We had them in sequestered in a room, so they're on their way down right now.
Okay, great. Okay. So we have four that we're interviewing this morning, and so we'll proceed.
Yes.
And we do have questions that we want to ask of them. I may call upon committee members to ask a question as we proceed. Good morning, Gary and Dal. Sorry I can't be at the headquarters this morning. I'm at a remote location, but thank you for coming from Washington for the interviews, and we will proceed. Now, Carmen Group has represented South Coast. Here's Carmen has represented South Coast for the past few years, so we know you're somewhat familiar with the agency. But we have with us this morning Supervisor Manuel Perez. He's in the Riverside office, and he is new to the district, and so you may not have met with him before or know him. We also have Dr. Burke and Dr. Parker in a remote location, and I think you probably are acquainted with both Dr. Burke and Dr. Parker.
Yes.
So let me ask the first question, and this would be, what are the challenges that you see the South Coast having to meet in the next few years in our Washington operations there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Can answer that, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much.
Wait a minute, you know, you have presentations. Do you have some presentations you want to give?
We're happy to make just a brief opening presentation if that works. Yeah,
Why don't you go ahead and do your opening statement and your presentations. We'll go there first, and then we'll.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're delighted. Thank you, Chairman. We appreciate it very much. We're delighted to be here today, representing the Carmen Group. The Carmen Group is a full-service government relations firm in Washington, about 30 years old. We've represented South Coast now for about the last 6 years. We represent a wide variety of clients in the public sector and the private sector. We have, in particular, we are very pleased to be working here with South Coast on the challenges that it's dealing with. And Dal here can chime in for us, just on general stuff.
Right, yeah, and so I've been with Carmen Group now for 18 years and have worked closely with Gary for a number of those on the air quality district's agenda in Washington. Also worked with a number of state and local entities in California on their various federal needs through appropriations and authorizations for infrastructure projects. And again, I believe we are excited to have this opportunity to continue representation and look forward to meeting the challenges of the district going forward. And then
Yep.
Gary, you want to address the question, or you want me to?
Yeah, I think we can turn to the question about the challenges facing South Coast going forward. Obviously, you've got big challenges meeting the air quality goals from the EPA, and it's a big challenge. And we
Well, one of the things that I think that we believe has changed since Tuesday is that California actually has increased its presence in Washington and their seat at the table. And frankly, we think it's an opportunity to help meet the challenges once we get our legislative package and agenda set, to really work with our delegation to have South Coast and the air quality needs of the citizens of LA area to really be part of the package that comes out. This is a president that is transactional, as we all know, and we want to be in the deal making posture. And we believe that the investments that have been made by the South Coast through its continuing meetings on the Hill and with the administration officials, we believe those will start to bear fruit if any kind of deal can be made on infrastructure going forward.
And we feel that, one of the challenges is to be bipartisan. We want to make a bipartisan approach. And we feel that we've tried to bring the more Republican perspective to South Coast here, and working with the EPA and the various federal agencies, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, and so forth, and the Trump administration, such as it is. We feel like we bring a good perspective that complements what the other consultants have been doing, and we want to continue that. We think that's a good approach. We're very much approach to the bipartisan. We do it in our firm. It's one of the things we do.
Great. Okay, I want to welcome Supervisor Rutherford also, who's with us now this morning. I'm opening it up to inquiries from our committee members, that questions they may want to ask the Carmen Group about their representation.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may, to Supervisor Perez.
Yeah, Supervisor Perez, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand that the Carmen Group, if I heard you correctly, you said that you worked with SCAQMD for the past 6 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I guess my question is, what has that experience been like, and what have been the successes? How do you measure success?
Right. We feel it's been a very good relationship, and we've been instrumental early on in helping to establish the new targeted airshed grant program, for instance, working very closely with Congressman Calvert at the early stages of that. We felt that that was a good success. We've worked very closely on the DERA program as well. One of the issues there more recently with DERA is the fact that the Trump administration has called for cutting that program way back, zeroing out the targeted airshed grant program. We've kind of come in and tried to counter that. We've arranged meetings with the EPA and others to talk about that. We found that there are sympathizers within the EPA, even in the political ranks, that are trying to be helpful with us to keep those programs going, even though they've been proposed by the White House and the OMB to be cut back. And you've got to realize that there are internal fights that go on within the Trump administration over these programs, and we've been encouraging the folks that have been supportive of what SCAQMD wants to do and where they want to go. So I think that's been a success. We've used our leverage on the Republican side to intervene in cases where chairmen of certain subcommittees have wanted to zero out programs that didn't know the programs that well. We would intervene and get Republican members to talk to them directly to kind of make sure that they're preserved, and that's the kind of thing that we've done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from committee members?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Dr. Parker.
Have we been able to break the gridlock of getting in to meet many of the heads of the various different agencies that so that we can have an opportunity to tell our story, the concerns that we have? And the reason why I ask this is that it's understood by many people that California is not one of the favorite states that is liked by the administration. That being said, how have you been able to help us to bridge that gap?
Yeah, absolutely,
To get
Dr.
in to
Parker.
meet with-
Appreciate that question very much. Absolutely. You know, we have a very good relationship with the acting administrator, Andrew Wheeler. I've known Andrew for the last 20 years. He was a colleague of mine in Senator Inhofe's office when I worked there. And I've known him in the lobbying business as well, and we've talked frequently. We've arranged a meeting here with Andrew. I knew that Wayne was coming out next week. I contacted Andrew, and he's offered to have a meeting with us directly next week, and it's a propitious time, particularly on the issue of the ultra low NOx that we are so concerned about, getting EPA to initiate a rulemaking in that area. And our intelligence from the EPA and from people around the EPA is that there are going to be some meetings here very soon on that issue, the ultra low NOx issue, that will determine how the administration proceeds on this. And I think it's a good time for us to get in front of Andrew directly. And I hope we can make this meeting next week work, Wayne, if it's good for you. But we are happy to facilitate those kind of meetings. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I have a question. This is not to lobbyists, this is to our executive director. This is the first time, did you know about this meeting, Mr. Nasser?
About the meeting being set up with Andrew Wheeler?
Yes.
Yes. I've known about this.
What board members are going with you?
No board members are going with us on this trip to DC. The primary purpose of the trip to DC is participation on a industry truck stakeholder panel discussion. And that'll be with, for instance, the Engine Manufacturers Association, mechanical engineers. And so it was that reason that I was in DC. But while I'm in DC, we always try to have meetings with various other members. We are planning to do a congressional trip in January.
But Mr. Nasser, who made the decision that no board members go meet with the director of EPA?
No one had ever made the decision that a board member would not meet with EPA. Prior to Andrew Wheeler's appointment, we had made numerous attempts to bring board members to meet with administrators.
I know that. I know that, but you just said that you knew that there was going to be a meeting and no board members are going.
Well, Dr. Berger, if I could intervene, I mean, I just took it upon myself to
Who are you?
arrange it. I'm Gary Hoitzman with the Carmen Group. I'm Gary Hoitzman with the Carmen Group. And, you know, I didn't really ask for permission to set this meeting up. You know, I just, you know, in our normal course of work, when there's an opportunity, when one of your top people are out in Washington, I thought it would be a good idea to set up a meeting with Mr. Wheeler. And if
I think that's excellent. You know, we've been trying to get a meeting forever. And, you know, I appreciate you doing that. That's not my problem. My problem is the one time that we do get in to see him, there's no board meeting. There's no board members.
So Dr. Berg, this isn't the first time. I also
It's
know.
easy to send somebody back.
Yes.
Did you ask any board members if they wanted to go?
We've asked board members for January, Mr. Chairman. This one is right
This
after
meeting
the
is in
election. No, a meeting with the board member is in January. That's the one where we plan to bring
Oh.
board members back.
You have a meeting with the director of EPA in January.
No,
We will be setting that up for January.
have a meeting next week. Good.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, are there questions from Supervisor Rutherford for our, for the Carmen Group?
No, thank you.
Nothing, okay. Let me ask, Gary, how active you will be in working on the efforts for for the South Coast District? How active is your firm going to be?
Our firm is active on a daily basis. You know, we're constantly monitoring developments in Washington that have effect on South Coast. We're attending meetings on the Hill. In particular, we're involved with a lot of Republican coalition meetings in the Congress and in the that are attended by people in the federal agencies and stuff like that. So we're constantly looking for opportunities to be helpful to AQMD. I have it on my agenda to be very active, particularly on the priorities of the agency, particularly DERA, the appropriations, when we're coming up into the appropriations, to be helpful on the congressional side and also on the agency side. We're looking for opportunities to help promote this ultra low NOx rulemaking, to get that started. That's a critical thing for the agency. It's something that is not necessarily supported by Republicans necessarily, but we have made a specific effort at the Carmen Group to assemble this coalition of industry groups, business groups, trade associations, and others that, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, others with the Diesel Technology Forum and the Engine Manufacturers Association. Working with Wayne, we've done 3 major meetings in Washington with this coalition, and I keep in regular touch with them. And now we're broadening it out to have them work with the congressional offices that they represent, that their companies represent, that can be part of a coalition, that can be helpful in moving this forward. And we've already gotten groups like the Chamber to weigh in with the EPA to push this forward. And so I try to keep in touch with the EPA, try to get intelligence out of the EPA of what's going on. We've tried to give a heads up to Wayne and others when we detect things that might be helpful. For instance, back in the summer, we were talking to some of even the career people at the EPA, telling us to that deliberations were going forward on this ultra low NOx thing, and not to push it too hard at that time, because they wanted to get past the election here. They didn't need more letters and things like that, but they were dealing with a delicate political balance in which the agency wants to move forward, but they've got to walk the tightrope of the White House and the EPA, which also has, and the OMB, I was going to say, the Office of Management Budget, which also has a role in this to play. So they wanted to give it time so that they could make this work. And of course, this was confirmed when we met with Bill Wareham, the Assistant Administrator for Air there, as you'll recall. And so
I recall.
We're trying to be as helpful as we possibly can be in providing the agency with the intelligence it needs to move forward in the right way.
So now also that the midterm elections are over, what is your forecast for what we can be doing in the next year with the new representatives?
Well, we look at this as an opportunity. I mean, with the Democrats taking over the House, You can make all these predictions of gridlock if you want to do it, but what we should be looking at right now is looking at this as a positive opportunity. We're optimistic, quite frankly, that this presents an opportunity, particularly on infrastructure. And infrastructure has been something that we've looked at as an opportunity to get more funding for the South Coast on this clean air issue. And so listening to the President's press conference and Ms. Pelosi's press conference talking about infrastructure, we should look at this as an opportunity. We should get out there to Washington as soon as possible and run it up the flagpole with our supporters in Congress and be looking to shape whatever comes out of the Congress on infrastructure in a way that works for the South Coast. And we think we should, as long as there's a hope for something being done, we should work that very carefully and very diligently.
Okay, thank you. Do committee members have any further questions they would like to pose to Carmen Group? If not, I will close out this interview and we'll move on to the next applicant. Anything? I see nothing. Thank you very much for coming today, making the trip out from Washington. And thank you for your service to the agency.
Madam
Thank you
Chairman,
for the opportunity.
Yes.
I do have one comment. Carmen Group, before the Carmen Group was with us, I had long conversations with Supervisor Antonovich about their abilities to move things in Washington, and he convinced me at that time that they were a worthwhile organization. And so he and myself moved to make sure that they joined our team. I think that they have done an admirable job in the past, and I don't want them to think that because I'm a little irritated about this meeting with EPA that I don't appreciate what they have done for us over the years. So I don't want you to leave with that feeling.
No, not at all. We understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Gary and Dal, for coming out. And we will be, I don't know when this recommendation would go up to the board and the final decision will be made by the board, I assume. Do you want to explain the process, Derek?
Yes, ma'am. So the committee today will make a recommendation to the full board. It'll go to the December governing board meeting for approval.
All right. So you would not hear back from us until after December. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
But aren't the meeting, the recommendations of the committee public?
Yes, they are.
Of course.
So that they'd hear
Should be.
they'd hear what the committee thought after the committee meeting, right? Hello,
Yes.
Derek?
Yes. Yes. So that's typically what we do is after the committee deliberates, I'll go back if they're still around, if the interviewees are still around, I'll go back and I'll inform them what the recommendation is to the board.
Before we call Mr. Nastri, I know you're going to be in DC next week.
Yes, sir.
Is there some kind of way that while you're there, all the things that we've been talking about and meeting with the director, that we can see if we can't really have something that we can meet in order to share some of our concerns here and the things that we have been looking at toward with the director himself as a board?
So Dr. Parker, I've met with Andrew Wheeler once he was appointed as the acting administrator. And he's well aware of the challenges that we face. And I worked with Andrew Wheeler when he was in private industry before his appointment. So I know Andrew, and I'm not concerned about us as a board or individual board members meeting with Andrew. Andrew will be very open to that. And as you know, or may know, Andrew actually was part of Fagery, Baker, and Daniels at one point represented South Coast AQMD. So he's very familiar with South Coast AQMD and the issues that are there. And in fact, he's taken some heat for taking a meeting with me because I was, quote, a former client of his, even though he hadn't represented South Coast AQMD for over 6 years prior to his appointment. So Andrew knows our issues. There is, I am optimistic that we'll hear a very important announcement next week regarding heavy-duty trucks, and we'll see where that stands. But our plan for next week was basically for me to go in, do the meeting, and while I'm there, if there were meeting opportunities, to try to lay the groundwork for the meeting in January. We thought January would have a better time to meet with board members, because if there's new members, they'll have staff. We'll be able to lay the issues out before them as they move forward. I agree with things that Gary and Dow had talked about with regards to future opportunity. And I think that while I'm there in DC next week, I want to just sort of lay some seeds, if you will, and bring in the board members in January to really say, these are the ones that are important for us, but at least they'll have an awareness of what those issues are. So I don't have concerns about us getting into Wheeler the same way that we did with Pruitt. I never knew Pruitt, and Pruitt was just very difficult to get through.
Okay.
You know, I personally,
Yes, sir.
I don't, what you say is logical, but I don't agree with that.
What would you recommend?
Anytime you're meeting with a secretary in the president's cabinet, and there's an opportunity for board members to be there, I believe they should be there. You know, I know Supervisor Rutherford's busy, and Judy's busy, and our newest member, Supervisor Perez, is busy, and Clark, I know is busy because I try and get him on the phone all the time. But they should have at least been offered the opportunity for this meeting. That's my personal opinion. You may not agree with that, and you may not think it's consequential. But I just, I don't think that anybody from this board who goes to meet with someone at the secretary level should go alone. That's just my opinion.
Point well taken, Chairman.
Okay, are we ready to move on to Cassidy and Associates?
Yes, ma'am, we'll bring
Members?
in Cassidy, and representing Cassidy is Kai Anderson, chairman of the company, as well as Amelia Jenkins and Caleb Frolick.
Okay, thanks, Amelia. And
Thank you. Good morning. Should we?
good morning.
Hi.
Good morning,
Where's everybody else?
Cassidy Group. I apologize for not being able to be in AQMD headquarters this morning, but we have with us some people that you may not have met before. Supervisor Manuel Perez is our newest board member, and he is with us in the Riverside office out in Palm Desert, where it's probably nice and warm and lovely. And we have Dr. Burke in a remote location. You met both of them. And Supervisor Rutherford right here in the AQMD headquarters. And I know you've met Supervisor Rutherford as well. So we want to first thank you for coming all the way out from Washington, but we have lovely weather here for you, so we hope that you will enjoy a short stay. And we'll move right into the proceedings. Do you have a presentation you would like to start with?
Yes, so we would take a few minutes first to start with a thank you to everybody here for inviting us for this conversation. And because not everybody knows us, I thought I would just start with a quick recap of who our firm is. We are 25 senior level lobbyists from the House, the Senate, and various federal agencies. We're bipartisan in our makeup, bicameral, and we recruit for substantive experience and for geographic diversity. So we have folks from all over the country and are in a position to work with pretty much any office in any agency that might be in question. And we are a firm that is positioned for sort of any political makeup and changes in political makeup of the ecosystem we work in. And so that particularly comes in handy right about now. As it does often every 2, 4, and 6 years, because the one thing that you can predict is that you can't predict the outcome of elections, which is why we have them. The election that has just passed, I think, in many ways is very good news for South Coast. I'm going to touch a little bit on that, and then we'll wrap relatively quickly so that to the extent that you all have questions for us, we can take them and move from there. From the standpoint of the election that just occurred on Tuesday, obviously the dust isn't completely settled, but the thing that is clear, probably the key thing that is clear, is that Democrats will control the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi will likely be the Speaker, and that combined with the reelection of Senator Feinstein and her deep seniority is good news for South Coast. Why do I say that? I think in a lot of ways, South Coast priorities had to be defended in the last Congress, whereas now there'll be less downside risk on a day-to-day basis. And things were very much in a paradigm of protecting funding priorities and those sorts of things, whereas now I think there is greater room for a more proactive agenda. Given the differing approach that House Democrats will take toward clean air and funding of things related to clean air. In addition, the ban on earmarks for the last few Congresses has been an impediment to some of the things that would be useful from a South Coast perspective. And there's a move afoot to whether or not they go back to earmarks of old. We would be very surprised if Democrats aren't more aggressive about directed congressional spending. Not likely in the sort of earmark for a particular company sort of way, but in making sure that the Trump administration spends money consistent with priorities that the Congress works out, consistent with their constitutional responsibilities. And the last thing, and I think this is from a perspective of places where the Congress and the administration can work together, there's a lot of talk now about infrastructure and coming together around infrastructure investments. And we think that you all are well positioned to participate in that conversation, to drive that conversation, and to benefit from the infrastructure investments that both parties honestly want to make and that the administration has been talking about for a couple of years. So I'll wrap with this relatively quickly. We're excited and honored to work with the South Coast. You're the preeminent clean air organization on the planet. And from our perspective, our team wants to do this work. And as you mentioned, Supervisor, there was a little bit of a scuffle in the office about who got to come on this trip. Not just because we wanted to get away from Washington for a couple of days, but because we view this work as really, really important work. And whether that's Janie Thompson on our team, who works on clean air and vehicles and has a background on the Science Committee and at the Department of Energy, or Caleb, who's with me today, who has a background on appropriations, marine vessels, and comes from Senator Lisa Murkowski's Energy and Natural Resources team, or Amelia, who's worked at the DOE and Western Governors and as the staff director of the Energy and Power Subcommittee, or Water and Power Subcommittee of House Natural Resources, or as legislative director to the incoming chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Peter DeFazio. I could go through our long list, and rarely do we put as many lobbyists on a day-to-day basis on a client as we do with you. And that's not driven by you demanding it of us. It's driven by our folks wanting to participate in what we do for this client. And as a scientist, I will finish with this. You know, I appreciate South Coast's science-based, goal-oriented approach to the work that you do and to the advocacy that we do on your behalf as we seek to improve the lives of nearly 20 million people that you all protect and represent every day. It's an honor to do work with you, and we think you all set a great example for the rest of the country, and hope that we can continue to represent you in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you. You've covered a lot of area there. So I'll turn to the committee members to see who would like to pose a questions. Supervisor Perez, are you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes. Did I hear you correct that you've worked with South Coast Air Quality Management District now for a period of years?
Yes, sir, for 3 years.
For 3 years. So I guess I appreciate that. And I appreciate your introduction as well. Thank you so much for that information. As you know, I'm the newest member here to the team, so I'm still trying to catch up. But I guess my question to you is, what has that experience been like? Where have you been successful? And ultimately, you know, how do you measure success?
So let me just give you one example, and I think this would be an example of where a firm of our sort of breadth of experience is useful. Obviously, we have folks who are experts in core issues related to clean air and those sorts of things, the sort of everyday work you've got here. But you had an issue with respect to emissions of hexavalent chromium come up in the last year. And you know, part of our team is a team of defense experts, retired military folks, people who've been in the Pentagon in various branches of the military. And you know, one of the places in sort of a out of our normal swim lane place that we stepped up on behalf of South Coast was in an effort to engage with the Pentagon on these matters and start charting a direction for resolving issues around hexavalent chromium. And that's actually an area where we think there's opportunity for continued work. Obviously, it's of importance to all of your constituents, as well as to the businesses that operate within your territory. And so that's one example. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I think we've continued to position the district with relationships across the board in the House and Senate and administration. And I think one of the things, and also coalition building, and I think one of the things that does is enables the district to adapt to political change like we've seen in this past election really well. So while the California delegation has gained power, we have outstanding relationships, and we've been in touch with all the Democrats in key positions in the House so that we're not having to start from scratch with those leaders. And I think by also continuing conversations with coalition partners like American Lung Association and others, we're in a really good position to hit the ground running in this Congress. And that's one thing that we have layered on top of our sort of day-to-day work for South Coast.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Supervisor.
I was going to say just thank you for that. And I think, you know, it's important that we hit on a few points there. Obviously, the issue of the hex chromium and working with the Pentagon. But I think ultimately there are some values that are important when it comes to legislation and making sure that we get our agenda, our concerns and our goals met. Access, coalition building, relationships, communication, being ready to go. I can appreciate all that. I guess my other point I'd like to make is, you know, the issue of time and the issue of multiple projects all at once. And so I just wanted to make sure, you know, how you handle all that, and as well, you know, who will specifically be working on our issues. Would that be the principals or other staff? And I'm sure you have quite a bit of staff that can do that, but just managing time is always a concern for me as a former legislator. You know, I get that concern, and as well, you know, having multiple projects, I want to make sure that we're prioritized among all your efforts that you're working on for other entities that you're representing.
So I cut short on this just in time, so I'm particularly appreciative that you asked the question. You know, I started to walk through what some of our folks do with you all. I didn't mention Charles Brittingham, who's our person who focuses on your surface transportation and goods movements issue. Jesse Barba of our team, who focuses on environmental justice related issues, along with Amelia and others. Some of you have met a new member to our team, a woman named Julie Eddy, who comes to us as a former chief of staff to a California member who serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which obviously has health oversight as well as clean air, energy, et cetera, in the House. Vern Simmons and others from our defense team have pitched in, obviously, on hexavalent chromium, but other potential opportunities there. Those of us who focus some of our work in the appropriations realm includes Caleb, as well as Jordan Bernstein, who is our Chief Operating Officer. I work on those issues as well, having worked on them for the past 20 years. Russ Thomason of our team will work on Senate GOP-related matters as appropriate and outreach to the Trump administration. Caleb does some of our Trump administration outreach. Charles Brittingham also does some of that work. So we have a variety of folks. On specific issues, though, for example, you know, low and zero emissions vehicles, somebody like Janie Thompson is on that on a day-to-day basis. So the staff around the table nods their heads because they know that she is in the weeds on those things every day. But that said, we work as a team. And again, you know, you all have lots of issues, right? And crossing a pretty broad range of committees of jurisdiction, both in the House and in the Senate across the parties. And it's, from our standpoint, again, it's a fun challenge, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Can I add just one other aspect of this, which I think is important? So, you know, we have really developed excellent working relationships with the staff here, and they certainly help guide where our priorities and where our time lie. But as a group of former staff people from member offices on Capitol Hill, we're very goal oriented. And I think as a result, we're not satisfied with just working on a as needed basis to set up meetings or knowing sort of which elevator button to push when folks are in DC. We want to help you achieve your goals. And we put in the time that's necessary to do that, and we put the resources to where they're needed in order to do that. And it's just the nature of the people that work at Cassidy and Associates. And I hope we're able to continue to do that because it's very rewarding.
Yes, Mr. Nastri, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think I wanted to try to address the supervisor's question because I think what he was asking is, you know, with a big firm and a lot of principals and with a lot of great titles and great experience, sometimes it's not those people that are actually doing the work. And what I just want to convey to the supervisor is that we have a great relationship across the board. If I need to talk to Kai, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're the chairman and CEO of the company. And Kai is in the weeds on issues that we need him to be on and is always ready to engage. And that's true for Caleb, for Amelia, for Jamie, and it's true for our entire staff across the board. We work with them constantly, and I just wanted you to be aware, Supervisor, that it's not just one or two people that are relegated whenever they need it. They are constantly on for us.
So as an example, Amelia leads the team on a day-to-day basis along with Caleb, but if there's an instance, as Mr. Nastri points out, where it's useful for me to use a relationship I've got at EPA, I'll do that in a heartbeat. I'm also, although I'm a PhD scientist by training and have worked on climate bills when I was on the Hill, I also know that Janie Thompson of our team is smarter than I am on the nuances of the Clean Air Act, and so I don't Bigfoot her. But we work as a team, and we're in constant and ongoing communication to make sure we're bringing the right pieces to bear at the right times.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Thank you. Any other questions, Dr. Parker?
thank you very much for your presentation. Recognizing that you are a scientist, what have you been able to contribute to help us with the hexachrome issues that we're having now here, recognizing that many of these factories are saying that they're making these products for military or defense usage. Recognizing that to be the case, we still are having the pollution issues. So what have been your input into them of trying to direct something that is going to make it less hazardous for the people who are surrounding those particular areas from having to deal with the pollution problems that the hexachrome is creating now?
So, Dr. Parker, thank you for the question. I will start with the proviso that I am not an epidemiologist. I'm a geologist by training, so my direct scientific background isn't going to be on point for you. That said, the folks on our team that we have engaged with the military with, and started doing work with the Pentagon on behalf of South Coast, is to help them understand what the health threat is, what role does the military play, and what role can they frankly play in addressing the issue in a foregoing fashion, so that we get to a point where we start to address some of the human health and environmental concerns that are obviously quite acute. That work isn't done yet, but it is work that we are now engaged on, and look forward to working with you to resolve as expeditiously as we can.
Thank you. I move on because we have some time constraints here, and I think unless there's any more questions, I think we'll move on to our next applicant. Is that all right with my members? Okay. Thank you so much for coming out from Washington. The process here is the committee makes a recommendation that goes to the entire board. The board will look at those recommendations in December, and final decision will be made at that time. Thank you.
And again, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, the next group will be Case and Associates, and that is going to be Mark Cadish, Chris Carrick, and Dave Ramey. And we'll bring them in now. So we're waiting for them to come down. Apologize for this. Okay, they're coming in. Mark Cadish, Dave. Morning, gentlemen.
everyone's there.
We do have one here.
Good morning, Kadish. Thank you for coming from Washington. I'm not at the headquarters this morning. I'm at the remote location here. We also have a new board member that you may not have met before. We have Manuel Perez, who's in our Riverside office. Good morning, Manuel. And then we also have Dr. Parker, Dr. Burke, who are in Beverly Hills remote location. And we do have Supervisor Rutherford. Is she going to return? She has left the room, I think, but she was here earlier. So, so we're going to get right into it because we do have time constraints.
Sure.
And I'll turn it over to you. Would you like to make an initial presentation?
Sure, I'll just introduce the firm again for those of you who might not know us. I'm Mark Kadish, Kadish & Associates, with Dave Ramey and Chris Keurig. We've had the pleasure of representing South Coast now for a little over a decade. We've specialized for South Coast primarily in California. We've worked both sides of the aisle and both chambers in Congress for AQMD, and maybe as we get into it, we've, I think, been successful both in building relationships for AQMD as well as getting appropriations funding and both moving policy and protected you from some policy changes that you all were concerned about. And I might just have Dave and Chris introduce themselves, but we've been, I think it's cumulatively, we have about 70 years of experience. For those of you that don't know, I was on the Hill for, it's mostly Dave. I was for 16 years on the Hill. I was Senator Feinstein Chief of Staff for 10 years. I also worked in the LA delegation for a few years in the 90s. Dave, you might want to take it from there.
Not only was it a good joke, it's technically true. I was on the Hill for 32 years. I worked for former Congressman now Jerry Lewis, and for 24 years for Congressman Calvert, who you all know because you worked with him on a number of issues closely because of his appropriations role. And about 2 years ago, Mark saved me from the Hill, and I've been happy to work for you for those 2 years.
Yeah, and my name is Chris Keurig. I've been working with Mark now for 10 years, also working with the agency for 10 years. And prior to that, I worked for Senator Feinstein doing her appropriations work for also 10 years. So.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview. And now I'll turn it over to committee members to ask any questions that they may want to ask of the Kadish group.
Madam Chair, my questions for the last couple of groups took too much time. I'm going to allow my other colleagues to raise questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right. And thank you, Mark, for explaining some of your relationships with key people on the in our Congress. Let me ask this: with the midterm elections behind us, what do you see in the forecast for the important interests of the South Coast District?
So I'll start off, and maybe you guys can jump in. You know, obviously, some of the appropriations bills that we care about still have not been done or are scheduled for lame duck. Important programs that we've been working on, like DERA and targeted airshed grants. Obviously, with the new Congress, I think there'll be some new opportunities for some funding issues that we've been pursuing. Wayne's done a great job back in DC, kind of pushing on some new issues, new funding streams. But I believe we've had very good support from both sides of the aisle, particularly Senator Feinstein and Congressman Calvert on DERA and targeted airshed grants. We've grown over the last 3 years, I think, from about 80 million to I think we're expecting about 125 million last year on raising those programs. So we see some additional opportunities for funding with the Democratic House, but we also see that Congressman Calvert has been enormously helpful in working the administration, and some of the things that we do is work with your other groups who maybe have prime responsibility for the administration, but trying to get some congressional influence to make sure that this administration knows on a bipartisan, bicameral basis that there's interest in moving a number of the clean air proposals. I don't know, Dave or Chris, do you want to add?
Sure. I'll segue off of what Mark was saying there about relationships, funding, and policy. On the policy side, we've been able to help recently. He mentioned some of the funding figures on the glider issue, the ultra-low NOx issue, cafe standard. I know Congressman Calvert was just out for a site visit here at the facility in October. They'll be moving into the minority in the House in the fall. He's on appropriations, so minority members still count a lot there, and that will help going forward with the administration as well as with his Senate counterparts, Senator Murkowski and Barrasso, who have jurisdiction on the Senate side on approps and on your authorizing side. Just a quick note on, California obviously is extremely well poised going into the new Congress. Your jurisdiction area touches on just about half the California delegation. Almost 26 members, all are in part, come under SCAQMD. And you've got, going forward, just on the key committees, 4 members on appropriations, 4 members on transportation and infrastructure, 3 on energy and commerce, 2 on ways and means. So there are a lot of relationships there that you've established over the years that will continue to benefit you, even more so in the next Congress once in the 116th, once the Democrats take over the House. Chris?
Sure. Just looking forward, Madam Chair. I think all eyes are kind of hoping that there'll be an infrastructure package of some kind. I think there's been a lot of talk about it. I think the devil in those details will be paying for it as it usually is. So I imagine that'll be a big topic of discussion as the new Congress comes along. I'm also optimistic and hopeful that even absent a large infrastructure package, there will be smaller infrastructure things moving forward. I think Chairman DeFazio has identified he wants to do kind of a sea, land, air type thing. So could create opportunities for the agency to make some inroads into mobile sources, which we've had trouble with before, particularly with the current Congress. And I think there will be opportunities, as Mark alluded to earlier, though, too. The first order of business is passing the FY19 bills, which still haven't happened yet. And those are the ones that we follow most closely for you in terms of funding. Are those the Interior Appropriations Bill, where EPA is funded, and it's protecting funding and protecting language and things like that. So we have work cut out for us between now and the end of the year before we even start next year. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Because I want to kind of move on. We know Cadiz pretty well. We've been working with them. And any other questions for the Cadiz group? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Oh, that was very. Wow. Okay.
It's like a march to the guillotine.
Very good sign. Very good sign. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fortunately, the committee has an hour. That's the way it's structured.
No worries.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, the next group, the next proposer is the Glover Group, and we're bringing in Catherine Ransom.
What's the name?
Catherine Ransom.
Again?
Catherine Ransom.
Yes, that's me.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. It's okay if we just pass these around. The folks on the phone have them, I know. Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And we're very excited about the potential opportunity to work together. I know that everyone has had a chance to take a look at our RFP response. The document in front of you is a tool that we often use for very short meetings like this to capture the essence of our team and our proposal and help organize the conversation a little bit rather than referring back to a multi-page document. So let me start off by just introducing myself. I'm a managing director at the Glover Park Group. I've been there for about 8 years. I spent about 11 years on Capitol Hill working in the Senate. And before that, worked for the Department of the Navy, handling environmental issues in and outside of the Clean Air Act. I'm happy to spend a couple of minutes introducing the firm. I know we haven't worked together before, but wanted to get a sense of whether you'd like to dive in immediately to questions or if an introduction would be helpful.
I think an introduction would be helpful. My name is Judy Mitchell. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm at a remote location, as are some of my other committee members. We have Supervisor Manuel Perez in Riverside with us. we have Dr. Burke and Dr. Parker in Beverly Hills, and at the table is Supervisor Rutherford sitting with you there at the table. So if you would do a short introduction, and then we'll get right to questions. We do have time constraints, and
Yeah,
so
there's a
it's
crowd gathering outside, so. Well, the Glover Park Group is a strategic consulting firm in Washington. We are a bipartisan firm. We do everything from government relations to media relations, digital and social, paid advertising, research, and we have an in-house creative team. And the method to our madness is we ask our clients what their issues are, what their needs are, and then we are able to choose from our suite of tools to apply the most important, most effective tool to achieve their goal. Today, we're talking mostly about government relations. Our team is 160 strong at the firm, 30 strong on government relations. We have about 15 registered lobbyists and about 15 support staff. I think 7 of our 15 are Republicans at this point, 8 are Democrats, so we're about 50-50 on our GR side, and you saw that reflected in our proposal. Our general approach to client work is we have a core team of between 3 to 6 people, usually led by one person, which in this case would be me, and then with a counterpart from the other party, so my Republican colleague Rob Seidman would fill that role. And then we draw from our large bench of individuals with various areas of expertise. Some of them are profiled on the sheet in front of you. A couple of folks I would flag there who are particularly deep in the appropriation space, which I know is a large priority, are my colleague Andrew King, who handled appropriations for 18 years for Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. And my colleague Brian Gaston, who spent about, I think about 18 years in Republican leadership on the House side. I have also worked essentially every bill in the environment, energy, and agriculture space during my time on Capitol Hill and after that. And the way that works is basically as needs come up, we bring in our colleagues, they join the team, they offer expertise, contacts, et cetera, and then they're not there every day, but they're an important part of achieving our objectives. On the right-hand side here, you see a couple of our, some of our existing and former clients. We represent everyone from NGOs to Fortune 50 companies. We do a lot of coalition work in and outside of the environment and energy space, and have a pretty broad set of folks in this space as well as across a number of other topical sectors. 2 things I wanted to mention off the top related to our proposal. I got a couple of questions on the letter. Our standard format is we offer a 30-day term on offers that we provide. Obviously, the proposal is good for as long as your deliberations take. Also, on our fee, you may have noticed that we structured the fee to encompass the full budget that was included in the RFP. I understand that you're actually interested in hiring multiple firms within that budget structure, and we're happy to make modifications to our proposal to accommodate the budget that's available for the second or third firm, regardless of, depending on how many you hire. I could say more, but that's probably enough, given the time constraints.
okay. Any questions from committee members to Catherine? Seeing none, we have your full package in front of us, and so we will, yes.
I'll
Ms.
ask one question.
Rutherford, sure.
So we've been talking to other firms about how the midterm outcome affects what we have been trying to do in our Capitol Hill communications. Can we get your thoughts on how you think things might be different for us now than they were last week?
Sure. I mean, you guys obviously have champions on both sides of the aisle, which is a huge plus. And so in some ways, you're still going to be in a good position. I think in many ways, you will be in a stronger position. On the House side in particular, with such a large delegation, a powerful group of leaders in the majority. One of my colleagues has spent a lot of time on Nita Lowey's staff, who's taking over as the Appropriations Committee chair. And so I think you have a strong group of leaders there who care about these issues, and also a strong group of Californians who care about what happens in the state, regardless, frankly, of where their district is from. So that's number one. Number two, I think the overall level of rancor in the city is likely to increase. But I think I know the current leadership on both sides on appropriations in particular, Shelby and Leahy, as well as the folks on the other side, are particularly focused on returning appropriations to a more bipartisan, normal way of operating. And I know you have obviously other priorities in the regulatory space that could be affected differently, but for approps, I think it's going to be actually a pretty positive environment for getting things done. One of our major strategic planks that we included in the proposal was, as essentially a nonpartisan agency, it's a challenge to capitalize on the politics that work to your advantage without becoming political. But I think if we were so lucky as to represent you all, that would be something that we thought of every day, all the time, making sure that we're using politics to our advantage, acknowledging the situation, but also making sure that you retain your status as a state regulatory agency.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Other questions? I'm sorry, we are constrained for time. The chair of the next committee is sitting here, and so I'm sure he would like us to move on to finish our business here this morning. We do
I have absolutely nothing to do. You can take all the time you want.
Well, do you have any questions, Dr. Berg and Dr. Parker? I think we have a very complete package on your response to our request for proposals. And so the process here will be this committee will make a recommendation to the entire board. The board will take that under consideration at their December meeting, and a final decision would be made at that time. So thank you so much for your information, for your very complete package to us, and we will be in contact with you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
So we have to make the recommendation, Madam Chair? We're good to go.
Yes. Derek, do you want to make some comments before we proceed with deliberations?
Sure. So, we've worked good with our current firms. They've done an admirable job for us in DC. But I'm open to whatever the committee is or wants. And if Wayne, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd like to add a few comments. We heard a lot, and we know a lot has happened since last week. And I think that when you look at the appropriations process, Kadish and Associates has tremendous experience on the approach side, and the relationships that they have. Congressman Calvert is still going to be important in the coming session, where he chaired EPA and Interior approach on the House side. He kept EPA's budget intact. He kept the 103, 105. He increased DERA. He increased targeted airsheds. He will always, and he will be a strong supporter of us, even in a Democratic administration. Because when I was at EPA and the Republicans were in the minority, he still worked very well with them. So he's going to be influential. And I think when you have his former chief of staff with Ramey and Associates, that's really important. Kadish and Associates. And I think that he's going to be even more so important. You're going to see Senator Feinstein continuing to step up and play a role. So I think from a bipartisan approach, funding, infrastructure, I think that Kadish and Associates is good. From a technical, in the weeds, whether it's environmental, whether it's defense, whether it's administrative, Cassidy has been strong for us. Kai has a great relationship with the administrator at EPA right now, the acting administrator. And when I think too about the Carmen Group, if I would say their single biggest strength has been able to put together this large, multi-group stakeholder party of industry. And this administration has listened very well, and that group has done the yeoman's work in terms of reaching out to this administration and presenting the business side on the importance of collaboration and not just quote the environmental, other blue state side. So all three of those have done, in my perspective, a really good job. I think they're still well positioned with the recent flip of the House. And as I said before, we've built up a lot of things over the last 2 years. I think we're going to see a lot of exciting things happen in the very short term, which I think would reflect well on the work and investment that we've had with all of the groups thus far.
Thank you. Committee members' comments about this morning's interviews. Well, I will say that the three firms that we have cover broad issues, both on the bipartisan basis, and as Mr. Nastri noted, the Carmen Group has been very good with getting the business coalition working with us on some of the really, like our heavy-duty truck regulation. And out of the three groups, each of them has some very key relationships with leadership on the Hill. So we have a pretty good representative group there. I don't see any reason to add another one or to change the existing ones that we're using. I would be happy with continuing with the three that we have. If other members feel differently, let me know. We don't know much more about the Glover Group, but we have a very good comprehensive package from them. But I don't think we need to take on that group or even add another group at this time or replace one of the groups we have with the Glover Group. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with it right now. I don't know how the rest of you feel. I know Supervisor Perez is new to this. I've worked with these groups in Washington, as have everybody else on the committee. I know Supervisor Rutherford has been to Washington on some of our trips. And so has Dr. Parker and Dr. Burke have been there with us as well. So if you want to chime in here and give me your opinions on how to proceed, let me know.
I have a question of staff. I agree with you 100%. But in our Sacramento representation, we have, I think, 3 different groups, and each one seems to have a specific strength, and is the reason that we hire them. In this particular makeup, I understand that the Carmen Group was hired for the relationship with the Republican Party, and Cadiz and Cassidy were probably hired for their strengths with the Democratic Party. Now, I may be wrong on that, but that was my take on it at the time. So, can you tell me one of two things? If they were hired for the Democratic Party, why do we have 2? And that's one question. And if we had one and increased the money, would we get better service from the one that we selected?
So, Mr. Chairman, let me take the first response, and Derek can provide any backup information, anything that I might miss. So, Kai Anderson, as we learned during the discussion, is the chairman and CEO of the company. He's relatively new to Cassidy Associates. He acquired it, I want to say, within the last 2 years, perhaps. Prior to that, he was an individual lobbyist. But as chief of staff for Senator Reid, he works very closely across the aisle. When he came into Cassidy, what he did was he really strengthened the bipartisan aspect of it. And that's why they're now, in fact, very strong with Republicans, particularly on the defense side, and particularly with the Pentagon. So if I were to look at the firms across the board, I would say that in my perspective, well, Cassidy is very bipartisan now. And they have good ties into the administration, they have good ties into the executive branch, and they have good ties onto Capitol Hill. when I look at Kadish and Associates has been with the district the longest, and it's really clear from just my short time here that on the approach side, they are tremendously strong. They also were very democratic, Mr. Chairman, when I came on. And with the acquisition of Dave Ramey, who was Calvert's chief of staff, they now have what I would consider, as a small firm, a very bipartisan approach from both the D and the R side. And they work really well together. So from where I sit, the perspective of the bipartisan nature, to me, Kadish and Cassidy are both bipartisan. Again, where I said with regards to the Carmen group, they do have a tremendous ability to reach out into the business stakeholder group. And their work has been very critical for the work that we've been doing with advancing the heavy-duty truck rule. So I think now, and we kind of heard that from the Carmen group, although I haven't met other members of that firm, I think they all are more bipartisan. I think that they each have certain people that have particular strengths on certain sides. So for instance, Dave Ramey is very good with Calvert and the R side. And I think Cassidy Associates, they've got contacts throughout. They've got, you know, former chief of staffs as their lobbyists, and they have great contacts throughout as well. And an important post, whether it's Murkowski, whether it's others. So I think they're all bipartisan to the most part.
So if I can add, Dr. Burke, to your question, I think that, you know, with the Kadish group, they've done a great job for us. And I think they're limited as to, you know, their focus, although their focus is very important to us. Where Cassidy complements, where Cassidy complements Kadish is Cassidy has a technical expertise that Kadish has some, but not as much as Cassidy does. So I think those two firms complement each other very well. They work together very well. They all work together. You know, even Carmen, they all work well together. But I think your question was more focused on the two, on Cassidy and Kadish. And I think those two firms, they complement each other and help us out in our overall goal in DC.
Okay. One of the questions that I have, when I think it was Kadish firm and the Cassidy firm was talking about the increasing of revenue that we receive from 80 million to 120 million, 125 million. How much was that directly in relationship to their particular efforts, or was it just that was across the board kind of allocation, appropriation for all industries so situated as we are?
Well, a lot of that was directed toward the DERA and the targeted airshed grants. And a lot of that was at the direction of Congressman Calvert with support from Feinstein and others. Congressman Calvert, as I said before, we really worked very closely with him on preserving EPA's budget because we got a big chunk of EPA's budget through the 103 and 105 grants. And in fact, we were able to share with the congressman some of the specific equipment. Our labs, our electron scanning microscope, was a direct result of 105 grant funding. The heavy-duty trucks and the deployment of that technology was a direct result of DERA funding. So Congressman Calvert and his support for those two programs, DERA and the targeted airshed, and his desire to put in additional money, we can't stress the importance of that enough. And I think that when you take a step back, sort of anecdotally, you think that the Democrats are going to say, well, this is the environment, we should put more money in there. You know, they're still going to have to work with their colleagues. And that's where I get into the fact that Congressman Calvert has been working on these issues for a long time and he's been a world champion of air quality and air quality issues. I think he'll continue to be important for us.
Okay. Any further questions?
Any more questions from committee members?
I would just say, Madam Chair and members, I respect your experiences, your expertise. I yield to your knowledge and the experiences that you've had with these entities. So I'm fine whichever way you all decide to go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move the item for the approval of Cassidy, Carmen, and the Cadiz Group as our representatives in Washington over the set forth time that is set forth in our RFP.
Thank you.
Second.
Supervisor Perez, have you seconded? Thank you. Okay, we have a motion by Dr. Parker, a second by Supervisor Perez. And may we have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Parker?
Yes.
Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Supervisor B. Manuel Perez?
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell?
Yes.
Motion passes
Good.
5-0.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we're running over. The next thing we have on the agenda are written reports. And then I must ask if there's any public comment at the AQMD or
We do have one public comment.
there's one public comment. And we have the post there at AQMD. And I see Mr. Ader coming forward.
Harvey, can you use the podium, please? Thank you, sir.
There's a mic here then? Yes? Okay. I'm Harvey Eder. I'm talking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. And over 90% of the public that supports solar energy and its implementation as quickly as possible. I came here yesterday and I'd like to thank Jill for helping me get my phone, which I left here last Friday. Anyway, I was out at this Energy Storage North America conference, and it was good. You should have had a lot of staff there. I know Matt was there and Naveen. Anyway, there was no notice. There was only notice of local governments and small business. This committee, I guess this is administrative or legislative, but I just saw it for the. I checked this morning, and there was still just that one was there, and they had the city of, right next to it. There wasn't legal notice for these committees anyway. And in reference to what you're talking about, like with DC now and consultants, it's extremely important that the UN report came out and said that we got 12 years left, or we're really in bad shape. And we got to keep like down to 1.5 degrees C. And if we have to go to 2, we're in bad shape. Also, the fourth climate assessment report done every 4 years by the state said that by 2100, there'll be 5.6 to 8.8 degrees Fahrenheit increase. And that's from over 3 to 5 degrees centigrade. That's the real world. And we got to get serious, and we got to change the conversation and everything we're doing in DC. And this whole thing with infrastructure has got to be integrated into an equitable solar conversion. Anyway, anybody have any questions? No? All right, thank you.
Is there any other public comment at any of the locations? Is there any other business to come before the committee? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned until December 14th. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone.